combination of information and events. The experts are independent, it's their own opinions. The opinions are their own, but the platform is official. We just provide them a possibility to express their opinions. I will lead this first discussion, moderated. I am Aram Abrahamian, the editor of Aravot newspaper. The subject of the discussion is as follows. Let me first introduce the panelists. The National Assembly MP, scholar of Azeri, Edgar Elbakan, political science, military expert Maher Akopyan. Thank you, dear friends. Today's discussion topic is the following, what I propose. Was it possible to avoid the war at all? History does not recognize the subjunctive, but nevertheless, dear colleagues, I propose to think about the factors which essentially may have combined and launched the war. What could possibly have been done elsewhere in the world or in Armenia in order for this not to have happened? Tatevik, I will give the floor first to you. Was it at all possible to go on with the negotiations under the aegis of the Minsk OSCE Minsk Group co-chairs? What was Azerbaijan thinking at that point in time, at the eve of the war, and what were the impediments to continuing negotiations? Had they continued, would there be no war? Thank you for affording me this opportunity. This question opens room for thinking and discussions. It was possible. Whether it was possible to avoid the war, my brief answer is not. Having monitored the maximalist expansionist policy of Azerbaijan for years, it was obvious that sooner or later the war would have become inevitable. We saw that in 2016, the April 4-day war. What could have been done differently? I'll put it this way, in my observation. The April Revolution and the events of 2018 simply deferred the war. Obviously, Azerbaijan, through snap parliamentary elections, was preparing for war, and their propaganda landscape came to corroborate that. Our revolution and the international situation that evolved around it deferred the onset for a while. What did happen in a nutshell in the negotiation process within the last 2 years? The Armenian parties were saying a simple proposal. Nothing can be discussed unless there is a proper environment and atmosphere. If the parties are so far apart, if there is war cries all the time, what can be done? There were proposals to exchange journalist visits. Mr. Elbakan was part of that program. But that was just a discussion, not negotiations. That was a discussion that would have resulted in real regulation. If Azerbaijan went to maximalist position, saying that they just want everything, what's the subject of discussion? That the discussion is about proposing a discourse. If there is no discourse, any discussion of a solution becomes unrealistic. Therefore, they were proposing realistic suggestions. Let's discuss the atmosphere, the environment. What should we undertake to make the societies closer, to exclude hate speech? Naturally, that was not in the interests of Azerbaijan, and obviously using the COVID as a pretext in the situation. Turkish aspirations in the region, which changed a lot in the conflict. This way or other, we're getting ready and predicting that there would be a war with Azerbaijan. Whether we could predict this scale of involvement or activity of Turkey, that's another issue. But war with Azerbaijan, I'll tell you clearly, something we were ready for and we're getting ready for. Had the issue been just with Azerbaijan, we would have, when you say us, we, was it the society, was it the military? I believe I can't say for society at large. My observation is that you cannot hold propaganda about the war day and night and distort the natural course of events in the public at large, but the relevant bodies that were responsible for it have predicted and were ready for it, but not the Turkey's involvement to this extent. We'll talk about Turkey, Varujan, but since I already named you, Edgar, the Prime Minister in his interviews several times referred to 2011. Most probably there was an agreed document in Kazan, which Azerbaijan nevertheless refused to sign. As far as I understand, this was the most compromise that Armenia was ready for. In the wake of that, the Azeri demands became more stringent. Is that so? By the end of the day, Azerbaijan was never ready, really ready for compromise. I'll tell you more. The current architect of Azerbaijan, sometimes they wrongly ascribe this role to Haydar Aliyev. In reality, it's Ilham Aliyev. And it's common knowledge, and the Armenian politicians. For example, there's memoirs by Robert Kocharian and Kari Kavana. The failure of Key West is directly ascribed to Ilham Aliyev. He persuaded his father not to yield an inch. Don't put this stigma of a traitor on our clan. Time will come, we will attempt to resolve it in a different way. Military way, yes. And coming to power, we sometimes forget this. This degree, this cultivation of Armenophobia is Ilham Aliyev's. When he came to power, let's recall what happened. Ramil Safarov case, his persona was selected. He was from the former Jabrail. The Khachkars in Jugha, their destruction, prohibition of entry of all ethnic Armenians entry into Azerbaijan. Because before that, there were Russian passport holders of Armenian origin that traveled to Baku, so their relatives, and they shut down that. And the expansion of the virtual conflict borders to the territory of the Republic of Armenia. It's common knowledge. In 2005, I think, Ilham Aliyev instructed the employees of the History Institute of the Academy to prove that the Armenian territory is Azerbaijan. So in the larger picture, the war was imminent. I can say on my behalf, but I had colleagues who are not here at this point. We always say that there will be a war before the April War, before the war, during the April War, after the April War. Does it all pertain to the negotiations, or the negotiations pursued their own course? No, this was all in entirety. Every factor had its role. Prior to the April War, you may recall their diplomatic preparations. At the PACE summit, there was the Sarsang resolution. They bought it by hard cash. No, the war doesn't appear from nowhere. You make preparations for it. In response to your main questions that you asked, Tatevik, and what is the subject of this, yes, the war this way or other had to take place. The timing is the question. Why it erupted right now? To some extent, this may be of interest for our people. Naturally, let's be frank, it's also may become a subject of political manipulation. The formula is as follows. Your adversary starts the war when they perceive that they are at the peak of their power and you are at your weakest. I repeat, in their perception. In the winter of '92, we were in a very difficult situation, and there is the then Defense Minister's testimony, Rahim Gaziev. In January of '93, he commanded large-scale offensive on the Martakert front, even when their troops were not completely manned. When they tried to accuse him of treason and asked for explanation why did you send them to attack when they were half-manned, he said because in December of '92 Armenia was in very grave socio-economic situation. Not to compare with current situation. No, that was just an illustration of an example. I was just telling you when do they time the offensive. In their perception, they're on top, and Atavik's factor is there. Obviously, Turkish support made them feel invincible at the very top, and presumably they also perceived Armenia to be weak at this point. I'm talking about their perception. We already have a war, so that's a fact. I'll tell you more. My person was referred to in the context of the exchange visit of journalists. I will not refer to that at this point, and I'll conclude at this stage my intervention. Already then, I think they had made the decision. You felt it then? No. Looking back, I can feel it now. I knew that war was naturally coming. Looking back in retrospect, I believe the decision had been taken over a year ago there. Varujan, expert on Turkey, it's customary to believe that Azerbaijan nevertheless would not have launched the offensive had it not been for full military and political support by Turkey. Do you agree? I believe not, and both of my colleagues essentially spoke about that. The Turkish support was just an additional factor that increased the perception that Edgar just referred to about the possible balance of powers and the chances for success in a pre-planned war. Whereas it's not that Turkish support is something we encountered the first time, let's agree on that, not on this scale. In this case, it's obvious and flagrant, but there were attempts at that in the past as well. Let me remind you that essentially Turkey, since 1993, has been directly participating in this battle, at least unilaterally shutting down the border with Armenia, which, after the war, in any approach by law, this is an act of war. So we're dealing here with continual phenomena, which, if we look at it, the Turkish side also perceived the current situation as the most convenient timing environment to win this battle. It's not incidental that they chose this timing, it's not incidental that they selected this methodology, and let's understand after all that the process is underway along the Artsakh line essentially are the logical continuation of the larger regional landscape, which unfortunately we're trying to think that we sitting here are closer to Paris and Brussels, and we're more interested in the processes on those capitals, whereas, and I've been talking about this many times, we are affected more by everything that transpires in Damascus, Aleppo and Baghdad than what's transpiring in Washington and Brussels. So if you look at the larger picture, since 2010, everything that transpires in this region should have been the first signal for us about the environment coming about, where the aspirations of Azerbaijan and the aspirations of Turkey were getting the Lebensraum. Azerbaijan would have attacked nevertheless had it even not been for Turkish support. Do you believe this? My friends have already identified the logic of this, and I fully share it. Yes, Azerbaijan was getting ready for this war. Let's broaden the perception. The Karabakh issue in Azerbaijan is somewhat of a hallowed topic. From methodology perspective, it's similar to the Palestine issue. Palestine is sacred, everything pivots around it. So the authorities feed this hallowed notion, and there comes a time, and I'm still using a metaphor, where the Intifada has to commence the struggle for this sacred success. And in this case, like my colleagues already mentioned, the course of these 30 years, and especially the period of Ilham Aliyev in power, we saw the gradual preparation. Even if the military political leaders did not wish it, it was necessary for mobilizing the society there. Maher, let's take an extreme example. Nobody likes it. Northern Korea. It's absolutely not similar to Armenia. Nobody likes it, but against nobody wages or starts a war against this country because it's well armed. Can Armenia, has it ever been, or could it ever become so strong in terms of weapons and munition that no one would ever dare to attack us? Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for the question. I would like first, before laying down my idea, to bow to the memory of those fallen in this war and wish patience to their next of kin. They fell for all of us, for our security. I personally and my family appreciate the courage and the feat of these heroes. Let's hope that their sacrifice was not in vain. There is a truth as old as the world. One needs to be strong, which when you look at the 5,000-year-old history, after all, it's the power that decides. Diplomacy is just an extension of power. You ask the question whether the war would have been there or not. We've from the multitude of alternatives that were possible, we settled on this one. Whether this was subjective or objective, we will yet learn, looking back in retrospect when all the documents are disclosed. But one thing is for certain: our war did not end in on May 12, 1994. I have to reiterate, the war wasn't over then, and the fact that there were no active offensive or defensive actions along the front line didn't mean that the war was over. Especially in the wake of 2010, like you remember, after this disconnect in 2011, the Aliyev regime took the direction towards armed conflict. Summer of 2014, the April War of 2016, and the 2020 Davos summer, so to say, war. One had to be strong. It's another issue, and maybe it's beyond the format of this discussion as to what we did or what we failed to do through those 26 years in the wake of 94. Well, it's an if question. Had we had the ammunition and weapons that we could not have access? Well, here's my opinion. If we, as a result of building a state, could have had, give or take, a result close to Israel, maybe no one would have attacked us. It's a subject of academic studies as to what transpired and what didn't through these 26 years, but we have what we have. We went through three presidents and one prime minister over these 30 years. One has to be strong, that's the secret of it all. But the international developments also played against us. The Syrian crisis of 2011 gave Erdogan, suffering from neo-Ottomanism, to test his model of hybrid war. But it's not accidental that the use of mercenary Bashi Buzuks was most active in the Syrian war, about the IS in the Iraq, and the result is obvious also. Now the Russian Foreign Ministry officially acknowledged yesterday that more than 2,000 mercenaries fight against us. Personally, Prime Minister, yes, essentially that's an official opinion of a country. So here's what we get: this Bashi Buzuk tactics was tested by Erdogan. If you remember, the strike UAVs were tested at the Syrian front line, and as a result of certain political developments, Erdogan didn't strengthen his success, but on the tactical dimension, he was not unhappy with the results. We saw the same in Libya. Marshal Haftar's forces who were advancing, as a result of combined use of UAVs and the mercenaries, were pushed back. Neo-Ottomanism is what Erdogan professes, and he learned that it is possible to wage a war with technology and on the expense of alien blood. Is it possible in reality? No. I've mentioned this on several occasions. For our army, these mercenary Bashibozuks are not a big deal. They're not in huge quantities to begin with. They lack the motivation as opposed to the Armenian warrior, and the Armenian warriors and the Armenian military machine has clear line of command, is well stocked and has a structure, so it could easily deal with these Bashibozuks. Our issue was the air supremacy and the UAV use. Especially in the most recent years, our authorities did realize this, and especially even the former authorities in particular. The later years of Serge Sargsyan's powers, they were seriously thinking about assuring air supremacy. These Su-30s that we brought and were, so to seem, proud of, they were negotiated to some extent under the previous authorities. We realized this, and our military theoreticians were predicting that the war will have a different look. Unfortunately, we did not complete the transformation of our army. Let's say conventionally, had the war broken out in 2022, we would have been more prepared than now. So you're saying if. Well, you know, the history settles on only one of the multitude of alternatives. So we have the situation now. Datevik, we will not avoid difficult or provocative questions. In some circles, there is this theory, hypothesis in circulation that Azerbaijan also launched the war because, among others, the Russian authorities had certain reservations or have certain reservations about the current Armenian authorities. What's your opinion about this hypothesis? I believe within the recent years, since my colleague Edgar Elbakyan already referred to that, the impression or the adversary gets about you matters. It sometimes seems to me that Azerbaijan's perceptions are based on media publications, and that was even found its place in Aliyev's statements. That was an erroneous exception. That's why perception. That's why Aliyev was surprised why they're not defeated yet. He was thinking about such a success that they've already put us on our knees. That's not bad that he has erroneous perceptions. As for your question, this perception that the Russians have a reservation about Armenian authorities, about who? The Russian political circles also talk about a certain lack of trust about certain MPs, being frank, who came from certain structures, not to be named here, but our work, our partnership with the Russian partners clearly demonstrated that they have nothing to fear. I'll tell you more. These authorities, essentially in the way they act, have demonstrated that they're very good partners for Russia. And the Russian analysts already acknowledged that, yeah, let's acknowledge finally that, propaganda aside, these people are true partners for us, and they have proven this in multiple ways. I will not voice this live, but they're not intending to change the political course, the position, and their security interests are solidly linked with the Russian geopolitical interests. So this factor is not there. It's really not there. The relations, the realpolitik relations have not suffered or deteriorated. They've even progressed. As for certain episodic components that are quoted, I do not think they have the weight or the impact that they are trying to present them to be. Aliyev is presenting the Prime Minister or Arayik Harutyunyan. As such, if you look at their statements, especially through the last years, you understand that this person was leading aid to the war. Edgar said Ilham Aliyev, but I believe Heydar Aliyev as well. In order to justify the ceasefire of '94, they put into circulation the term First Karabakh War, preparing the society for the second. I believe right the next day of the May '94 ceasefire, they were getting ready for this war. As for our relations with Russia, there were never any controversies here. I cannot ask Putin personally or Lavrov naturally, but even if I were to ask them, they would hardly answer frankly. But this hypothesis is something I've heard from Russian experts, political scientists. I interview them, they make statements. Why do they have this impression? I believe to some extent this is misconception. I don't know the reason. Maybe the adversaries have had good propaganda. They've built good propaganda against these new authorities of ours to present them to be anti-Russian. In reality, they have built very good relations with the Russian party. And yes, there are certain circles. I assume they had friendly relations with the former authorities and they have been affected by this propaganda. But if you look at it earnestly, there is no reason and has not been a reason for it. Edgar, many people have this impression that Russia is in possession of a button which it may have pressed to hold the war, and it can still press this button to end the war even now. What causes this impression and how close to reality is it? The question understood. This is a current perception. Prior to the war, they had the opposite perception of this same logic. They said everything is in the Russian hands. Even if they want, they can. If they really want it, they can hand over Karabakh to Azeris to entice them into the EU. There was the same misconception at the other end of it. And now it's the opposite perception that they could have and still can stop the war if he so wishes. The Yerevan State University Strategic Research Center, in the wake of the April War, set up a website on the April War which had FAQ, and the question was there, does really so much depend on Russia? Back in 2016, we said that yes, Russia is a player in the region, but Azerbaijan has enough of sovereignty to start a war. Even then we wrote this on that website in the FAQ, trying to rid the people of this misconception. Maher already said we have what we have, we got to where we are now. People with their own eyes, without Edgar's texts, can now get their own assurances that Russia is not omnipotent. Especially that Turkey is also in the game now, is part of this war project. They have their own input, which makes things for Azerbaijan difficult to get out of the war, that is. If you notice, Vladimir Putin tried to make everyone understand what are the red lines for Russia. And referring to Sumgait, was not to please our ears. It was a message to our adversaries that such scenarios are unacceptable for Russia. That is ridding territories of Armenians. Yes, violence, massacres are unacceptable. Today, Artsakh ombudsman came up with this statement, and he said that in the Hadrut region, Tokh village, a peaceful civilian was already beheaded by Azeris. Is it mercenaries or reservists, or is it not clear? The person is not identified, the military criminal, but we ascribe their crimes to the Azeri armed forces, and that's also correct in the context of international humanitarian law. I'm not a conspiracy theorist or speculating this. It is obvious that this is a message also to the Russian party. We've heard what you said, and Aliyev literally in one of his numerous interviews in these recent days said, yes, we listen to what our partners tell us and we take notice of it. So I heard what you said about Sumgait, but I'm not stopping little by little, but I repeat those acts. Yes, Russia is our strategic ally. Russia is a serious player in the region. Russia is a country that is capable of containing Turkey. For many years, beginning with the First War, Russia was our cover against Turkey. The Turkish Third Field Army was at the borders of Armenia. How come they never entered? Russia continues to play this role nowadays, but one should not take its role to the absolute, neither with the positive nor with the negative sign that they can stop it whenever they want. It doesn't work that way. The first Russia brokered ceasefire was on October 10th. It didn't materialize. Russia, as well as other members of the Minsk group, earnestly are interested, aren't they, in stopping the war? And they earnestly did not want the war to start. I don't believe they are pretending otherwise. The only party that really wanted, apart from Azerbaijan, for the war to erupt was Turkey. Was this sufficient for the war to have started? Turkey could easily, even bluntly, turn down European, American proposals or pleas. What allows the modern-day Turkey to behave like that? I believe, in order to answer that question, we have to partially get back to your previous question. We're in the custom to somehow limit our field of view, narrowing it to Armenia, Azerbaijan, Artsakh, Azerbaijan relations and linking it only to these three players, whereas the context is much broader. Russia in this region is not only guided by neither Armenian nor Azeri interests, but exclusively by Russian Federation interests. And there are other similar powers in the region that have their own interests. One of them is Turkey. Naturally, there are other players as well. So in these circumstances, talking about, Turkey, had it not been there, Azeris would not have attacked, or Turkish factor was sufficient in and of itself. No, this is not just an opinion, interpersonal relations of 3, 4, 5 people or men. This geopolitics, we anthropologize the geopolitics, making it sort of, boiling it down to the relations of two friends or foes in the street. We have to look at several factors. The first factor is the major energy mega projects in the region and the stages of their implementation with the relevant schedules that coincide with the events in the region. Second, for the first time in the region, borders are being changed. Those that were affirmed in the wake of the First World War in 1918 are changing before our very eyes, and quite naturally all interested players, including Turkey, that aspires to become a hegemon in the region. They never concealed this. They aspire in this new setup to gain their zone of influence. Why not, like Meher said, in Syria, specific successes in the northeast of sovereign Syrian state, Not acknowledging this, I think, would be wrong. And so the same approach Morag will take, they have about the Southern Caucasus and this narrow region. And we have to also single out another circumstance. In the current Turkish government, we have a force which can, in quite a literate way and in a targeted way, to take advantage of the contradictions between regional players, and this is attested to by their relations with Russia or partnership. In one segment it's all-out war, elsewhere it's cooperation, and elsewhere again it's neutrality. So we have to acknowledge that the 2020 September 27th aspirations to have a new zone of influence in the region, combined with some additional circumstances, helped the Turkish Republic to decide in favor of war. So here's the follow-up question. What gives Turkey the reliance to bluntly turn down Trump or Macron if what they say goes against their interest? If we oversimplify, it's the experience of their past 10 years. This side of 2011, Turkey in Syria and Iraq and in Libya already within the last 4 years have succeeded to implement more or less what they had planned, in some cases getting the maximum of their aspirations, sometimes the minimum. This allows us to claim that they saw here another opportunity. I would like to mention once again here that this experience has been gained by the Turkish Republic not only since 2010 but even before. In 1930s they made an attempt to take the territory which they believed should have been a separate part of Turkey. We're talking about Sancak of Alexandret in Syria, which in 1939 became the Hatay province. In 1974, the most democratic leader of Turkish Republic, Bülent Ecevit, implemented an operation which occupied a significant part of the Republic of Cyprus. Bülent Ecevit, which was the most democratic, received the title Conqueror of Cyprus. 2011, the list continues. All of this comes to prompt us that we're not dealing with the weirdo leader of a state. As you understand, we're not talking about a person, we're talking about institutions, and they're clearly acknowledging their regional interests and pursue them. This may sound symbolic, but Hulusi Akar, the current defense minister of Turkey, his PhD in a military university was on Southern Caucasus, in particular about Armenia. This means that in the top military echelon, this region is considered to be an area of vital interest. I have a question for you, or whoever will take it. Can we assume from all this that international law, international rules of the game no longer exist, and there is only just sheer power that matters? I'll attempt at an answer. Mr. Abrahamian, in the 5,000 years of human history, in what is called international law, it was always a convention. It only works wholeheartedly when the poles of the world don't think it's expedient to push forward their policy in a military way, attempt to push forward their politics in other lawful ways. Whether this is the Roman Empire or the Parthian kingdom, the Byzantine kingdom or the Persian Empire, doesn't matter. The international law only kicks in when there is a certain equilibrium of powers. It doesn't exist now? It does exist now. But the power centers have enough room to maneuver, which, for example, in the 1970s wasn't there. We could talk at great length about this. Let's get back for a moment to the main culprit of this, Erdogan. It's not only the person who pulls the trigger, but also those who incite it. Those who incite it may even be punished more harshly. When we look at the last 30 years of the history of the state of Turkey, we see a state where the bourgeois relations developed and a strong petty bourgeoisie stratum came about. Producers, middle class, car makers, garment makers, and this stratum started to act independently. These people perceived Recep Tayyip Erdogan as the epitome of their class interest. This class nonsense existed throughout history. Napoleon in his time was leaning on the petty and middle bourgeoisie. We're straying off the subject. I am approaching to why all this happened. What is the power of Erdogan? Within the last 10-15 years, by developing this middle class, he created the strong economic backbone of Turkey. When Turkey had the economic backbone and Erdogan's ambitions, this was the military technical mini-revolution, also added on top of that as a result of the merger of these two factors. The situation emerged when Erdogan had the material means, the technical means, and his personal ambitions in order to create chaos in all neighboring states. He succeeded in planting chaos in Syria, to a lesser degree in Iraq, is attempting to sow chaos in Libya, attempting to do that in Greece, releasing the flow of refugees. Unfortunately, the same chaos is expected in Georgia, and the military incarnation we saw here. Erdogan, as a result, wants to arrive at a situation when all of his regional neighbors will be weakened, succumbing to chaos, and he will be the power center. What did allow him to do this? We refer to the nature of hybrid wars. Compared to the same 1970s, currently it is possible to wage war successfully, technically, without the legal consequences. You fight with mercenaries, you fight with UAVs, you use your special forces dressed up in uniforms of another state, you name it. All of this resulted in neo-Ottoman appetite of Erdogan firing up. Very well. Since we have little time left, let me ask one general question addressed to everyone and expect brief answers. The programs of Aliyev to resolve the Artsakh issue militarily, this intention, to put it mildly, were shaken in these 40 days. Every Armenian is certain, like I am, that this will culminate in our victory. All of this war shall culminate in our victory. Every one of us has his or her own perception of this victory. Will this be a victory which will exhaust a new possibility of war, or will it just be several months or several years breather? How does each of you perceive victory? Let's start with Mahesh. A difficult question. I've been pondering about this from day one of this war. I have maximum and minimum perception of war. In a nutshell, if we restore the September 27 borderline, that's the minimum of victory. After that, the more the better is what kicks in. If we take more, so much the better. That's it. Moreover, I'll tell you, it's not necessary to have a front line mirroring the September 26 situation. If in principle we restore that situation, in my perception, that would be the minimum victory. Anything over and above that, the better. Edgar, a short answer. 2 minutes. Our struggle that commenced since '88, the uber objective of that was to preserve the political identity, survival of Armenians. Like Levon Petrosyan in his article mentioned, Armenians lived in Karabakh for 3 millennia, and they have to live for another 3 millennia there in Karabakh. If as a result of the war we succeed in ensuring in Artsakh our national political presence maximally secure and continual, I will consider that a victory. Maybe I could also answer in Maher's format, but since the combat is still on the way as we speak, I wouldn't reflect on borders. In a more philosophical cue, believing in victory, I'm certain that Armenia as an idea, as a reality, is there for perpetuity. Hayek cannot surrender to Baal. What is the? Is it the statehood that is that's the only format? Especially having a neighbor as Azerbaijan, yes, your statehood is the only thing that allows, like LTP said, to survive for another 3 millennia. That's the only way. Yes. Same question, Varujan. I'll pick up where my colleagues left from a slightly different angle. Let's acknowledge that war, one should not be afraid, fear war as such. It's lamentable, but yes, we will overcome when Armenia will not only have Artsakh as its inseparable political presence, but will also accumulate enough of a potential to be able to prevent wars, and if they are unleashed, be able to answer proportionally. This may seem paradoxical. If necessary, you have also to attack first in order to prevent events in the region that may be detrimental for the Armenian political presence. Putting this in the context of the Near East, I think this is an exceptional opportunity for the Armenian states to present themselves not only as fighters, exclusive bulwark of fighting international terrorism, but also to demonstrate that the hegemon states in the region that aspire to become the oppressive force of all nations and communities that are stateless, national or religion minorities, aboriginal to the region. For these communities, the state of Armenia may become the beacon to protect them. I'm talking about Syriac, Coptic communities and others. All of the communities that are in need of statehood support. So Armenia can become a state of a new quality. And that could be considered the victory of Armenia. Tatevik, I believe there are several strata to this. If we understand and perceive the entire spectrum of the situation, the real danger comes from Turkey. Many scholars of Turkey claim that the day of launching the war was chosen intentionally. 100 days ago, same day, Kazim Karabekir launched the march and attack over Armenia. Yes, there is symbolism in this. Yes, this is East. Nothing is done without symbolism. Essentially, that expanded over Aliyev. He has the same symbolism syndrome. As to what would be the victory would be the victory of our statehood in Artsakh, in Syunik, in Armenia, perseverance, because this is truly an existential danger looming over us. This is absolutely not a border dispute like they sometimes perceive abroad. Many of our partners that we talk to, they understand what we say when we say this is an existential problem, this is a genocidal danger. This is really looming over us. For me, the victory would be the security of our nation state, statehood in every accessible means. Could we rule out the war hereafter? I believe the people, our generation to some extent, for the first time, your generation is experiencing the war for the second time already. Every time we want to promise ourselves that we'll not allow the next generation to feel this pain. This is a big pain going through this loss, this war. But at the same time, if you want to exclude, rule out war, you have to, if you want to live in peace, you have to get ready for the next one. That's our super objective for the forthcoming decades. And the ultimate question, was it possible to prevent this war? Let's now transfer it to the future tense. Will it be possible to prevent the next war? You answered the first question, no. The war would have commenced, if not on September 27, let's say October 25th. It was doomed to happen. So, will it be possible to prevent the war in this region hereafter? Well, that doesn't depend only on Armenia and Azerbaijan. It would be hard for me to say 30 years down the road what will be the international situation here. But since our security depends on us, I believe, yes, it will be possible to prepare for the war in such a way as for your adversary to have his encroachments cut short right at the onset, crushing excruciatingly. Yes, it is possible to prepare for such a war and assure long-lasting peace. The question comes with a lot of responsibility, but the answer would be still yes. The Armenian statehood, if it elevates to the next level of development, would be able to preclude any danger that may either be existential or politically dangerous. I have to repeat, we need a qualitatively different level of a state for that. In a nutshell, the answer is yes. Even if no, there are mechanisms available that could reduce the likelihood of such a war or the scale thereof. It's not that it's possible. Right in the wake of this war, the day after, there would be no other priority for the Armenian state other than to prepare for the next one, which in and of itself assumes preventing in as much as possible or defer the next one. Failing that, our state will have really be facing a serious existential threat. You need the population, the elite, the capital, the investments. This will all be eroded. Starting from this point in time, although there is active combat, once the war is over, the next morning we have to get ready for the next one. Failing that, there will be a serious threat we'll be facing. Had we been living in New Zealand, maybe we could have gotten a longer breather to prepare. Well, we're not an island. Is it possible? Yes, possible, Maher. If right after this war we all resume building our state and become stronger than Turks, we're not New Zealand, the war with the Turks will continue for several centuries. We have to be strong and create a situation when the Turkish element will simply avoid attacking the Armenian state. That's the secret. Thank you, dear colleagues. Let me remind you, dear friends, that the Armenian Unified Info Center organized for the first time a discussion with the participation of independent experts. The question we discussed was whether it was at all possible to prevent this war, the one that erupted on 27th of September. Let me remind you who were the participants. National Assembly MP, scholar of Azerbaijan Tatyr Gayrabedyan, scholar of Turkey Varjan Agyaman, Edgar Elbagyan, political scientist and military expert Maher. Thank you for your attention.